If you're a planner like me, you've probably tried out a few planning tools, chucked some out the bin and kept some with you in your workflow. I've done the same thing, and I've sort of settled on using a combination of Notion and Google Calendar to do my planning. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how I use Notion for my planning. I use Notion together with Google Calendar, which I use to calendar block. But essentially, Notion holds all of these processes together and the bits and pieces, so I don't need to keep anything in my head. If you're new here, my name is Odile Mackard and I'm a lecturer. On my page, you will find a host of resources to become a more effective postgraduate student or academic. I also have a newsletter which you can sign up for at odilemackard.com. If you're a returning visitor, welcome back. Let's dive in. So the first thing I'm going to show you is basically what my Notion workflow looks like, so you can get a sense of how this helps me in my planning. My home page has basically what it is that I need for the day. I have a few things here. The first thing I have is a bar that basically has shortcut links to different pages that are important and that I navigate between often. The second thing is a quick capture bar, and this is to quickly capture certain tasks. I'm going to show you my master tasks database and my master projects database as well, and how those two work together. And then I essentially have today's tasks. So these would be tasks that have today's date as the due date. The next thing I have on this page is my active projects. So each project in my Notion workflow has a status, and if a project is in progress, it basically shows up on this front page. So everything that currently is tagged with in progress will show up here. I have a variety of different types of projects which I will also walk you through, and then I have a list of students who are awaiting feedback. So these are basically students who have sent me documents and who need me to give them feedback on those documents. And then I have a shortcut to my overdue task list. First thing I want to show you outside of this homepage are my master databases. And I basically designed my master databases based on what I've seen from a few YouTubers and a few Notion bloggers. But essentially Notion now has this function built in, so you no longer need to necessarily create your own projects or tasks database. They actually have projects and tasks available already. I don't necessarily use it, but it looks very similar to mine. My master databases consist of 4 databases: master projects, master tasks, master notes, and areas. The master notes database I don't use it as often, but I find that it is very useful to keep sort of meeting notes and other important workshop notes here. Sometimes you take notes on a piece of paper or in a notebook, and it's part of an important meeting, and when you look forward weeks or months from the time that you took it, you don't know where to find it. So I try and use the master notes as a way of taking notes in important meetings, in important workshops, like I said, but I don't use it as frequently, as I also use Notability on my tablet, and then I'll set a reminder to check those meeting notes so I can see what are actionable items that I need to add to my tasks. If you do the notes in Notion, you would essentially be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. When I use Notability, I essentially add an additional step to making sure that I actually have actionable points coming out of those meeting notes that need to be addressed. So the first thing is master projects. So basically, master projects houses all of my projects, and everything, almost everything I would say, is a project in my Notion workflow. And then I have tasks that are related to those projects. I'm not going to open my master projects database, but I am going to show you an example of some projects that I have in my Notion. Then I also have master tasks. So master tasks can be related to master projects, but they don't necessarily need to be. They can also just be standalone items, but they need to have a due date. If they don't have a due date, they won't show up on the day that they need to be done and then ticked as done, essentially. So they'll essentially just go missing in this database. And then the last important database that sort of holds all of this together is the area database. I essentially have a few areas listed here, so you can see them here. They research, supervision, applications, examination and review, blogs, YouTube videos. Basically everything, like I said, in my Notion workflow is a project. So if I am starting a new research paper, for instance, I will have a new project that is related to the area research. If I take on a new supervision student, I load that student as a new project and I relate the project to the area supervision. And I'll have a video later coming out about how I manage my students in Notion. So basically, if I'm starting a new application for whatever it may be, I have a new project and I relate it to the area application. The same goes for examinations and reviews. So when I get a master's research report or a master's dissertation or a PhD dissertation to examine, I basically load this as a new project and then relate it to the area examination and review. And the same goes for journal articles that I review, are also loaded as a project. The reason why I load these as projects is because I then want to break down the tasks within them. And I'm going to show you an example of how different tasks are assigned to different types of projects depending on which area they fall into. So just to show you an example of how this works, I'm going to take you to my applications page. On my applications page, you'll see two existing applications there, and these applications are filtered by the status of the application. So if an application is in progress, in other words, I'm busy working on the application and I have yet to submit it, or if an application is submitted but I'm still awaiting feedback on the application, they'll be on this page when I click on the applications button. If I want to start a new application, I can basically go to the new button and then I have a template for applications. And these templates are important because different types of projects will need different types of tasks assigned to them. So for instance, if I am reviewing a journal article, what I would need to do is I would need to read the actual article, then I would need to write a review report, and then I would actually need to submit the report. So those might be three tasks that exists within the examinations and review area. And so the template for examinations and review will reflect that. With applications are basically anything that constitutes an application, whether it be a job, whether it be a fellowship, whether it be a funding opportunity. And so I don't have as many templated tasks associated with the application. What I will definitely have is submit application, because all applications need to be submitted. And so this is what my application template looks like. So first of all, you can see the area related to that is applications, and then I would need to have a due date. So I usually have the due date as the submission date, and then I have the status will automatically be in progress. So there's no point really in loading an application if I haven't started it, so it's always in progress. These properties that are here basically are not just related to applications, they're related to all types of projects. So with applications, I wouldn't necessarily put an author, for instance. That would be something that's relevant if I'm starting a new research project. The same thing goes for playlist. Playlist wouldn't be relevant here. That I would use if I'm, for instance, using the template for a new YouTube video. It would need to belong to a playlist. So not everything that is here will necessarily be relevant, because these properties cut across all the projects in my master projects database. What I do have here are tasks that are associated to applications specifically. So like I said, submit application is a very important task, and I would just drag and drop that into the tasks database and delete the instruction that comes along with that. So usually I would set the due date for submit application on a different date that the actual application is due. So I don't, for instance, if the application is due on the 17th of September, I don't want the task that says submit application also to be on the 17th of September. I would probably set it to the 16th instead. Thinking through tasks that might be useful for an application. If it's a job, for instance, I'd need to update my CV. I'd probably need to write a cover letter. I'd probably need to, for instance, write a teaching statement if it's a job for a teaching position. If it's a funding application, I would likely need to draw up a budget. I would likely need to write a proposal. I would also likely need an updated CV, and then whatever else is specified in the application. So the day on which I create a new application is the date on which I break down those tasks in the tasks database. And based on whatever I've set as the due date for this application, I would then need to assign dates for all these tasks that fall before the actual application deadline. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to do that particular task on the date that I have set on the day that I'm creating the project. Not necessarily, because I sort of allocate my tasks on a weekly basis, bearing in mind due dates are approaching. So I can move stuff around in terms of the due dates of the tasks that are related to an actual project. But this is also nice because it helps me to see the scope of the work that is involved with an application. I just want to show you my NRF rating application as an example. There are a number of different items that I need to do for this application. So I need to write a statement on my best research outputs over the last 8 years. I need to write a statement on the best outputs from my students. I need to write a statement self-assessing my own research outputs. I need to write a statement on ongoing, planned and future research. I need to do a career profile. So there are basically quite a few tasks associated with this application. I obviously can't wait until the week before the application is due to do all of these tasks. So I try and spread them out depending on how much time I have between the day that I create the application and the day on which the application is actually due. The reason why I have applications on this front page which are both in progress and submitted is so I don't have any applications that go missing. I do have my applications database. I'm not going to open it. But basically if it goes into the applications database, it means it's gone. So I don't review the applications database at all. So I like to, until I know what the actual outcome of the application is going to be, I like to keep it here on this page, especially if it's an application that I might need to follow up and ask when am I going to get feedback on it. So only once I have confirmation that something is successful or unsuccessful do I change the status of the application to something that is on the completed list. That basically sort of goes into that black hole, which is the applications database. Another example that I just want to show you real quick is my research page. My research page basically has all my projects that are related to the area research. And these would be journal articles or book chapters primarily, or anything else that I'm working on that's related to research. So on this page, I basically have shortcuts for journal articles in particular, as those are the types of outputs I most commonly produce. And then I also have a short link to my supervision page, which is where I list all my students. Basically, I manage my students on the supervision page. And then I have research in progress on this front page. This basically shows me what I'm actively working on. It doesn't mean that every week I'm working on all of these projects, but I sort of manage them depending on what's more urgent and what I have time for. And within each research project, there will be different types of tasks related to such a project. This is basically the template for a research paper. Again, I would usually put a due date that gives me a sense of how long I have to finish this project. But if you know anything about research, you'll know that the dates never really work out the way we think they're going to work out. But if I'm, for instance, writing a journal article for a special issue, or I'm preparing for a conference, that gives me something that I can use to add the due date. Although the due date is not that important in the bigger scheme of things, the status of the project is what's really important. You'll see that in my template, the status is not started. Sometimes I'll have an idea for a paper that I really want to write, but I don't want to immediately start working on this paper. So it'll be listed in my research projects database, but it will be not started. And in my database, I basically filter by the status of the project. So I have my published projects, I have my in progress projects, I have my not started projects. And this is a database that I actively go back to, because I know there are all these projects that are not started essentially. And so I don't treat my research projects database the same way I treat my applications database. The research project template also includes a project overview. This is really important, especially if I'm just talking about an idea that I currently have, but I'm not quite ready to start the project. So in the moment when I have the idea and it's really fresh, but I don't have time to start it, it's really important that I fill out the project overview so that I remember what it was that I was thinking when I first wanted to start the project. Then I have project notes. So this is basically anything that I have related to this project I keep in here. And then I have potential journals or publishers. So I usually list at least 3 journals before I start working on an article. Sometimes you are so dead set on preparing your article for one journal in particular and they reject it, and then it just like destroys your whole life. So when I have 3 options, I know if I get that rejection letter, I'm simply moving on to the next. So I'm not even thinking about what am I going to do now? The instructions are already in this template for me. Then of course I have project tasks. This is very important. So if I have a project and the data are secondary, collecting data won't necessarily be a task related to that project. So if I'm doing primary data, that's something I need to actually add as a task. And if I want to do it over a period of time, I then add an end date to the due date so that I know during this period, this is when I'm planning to complete this particular task. Basically, this allows me to add project tasks for each research project I have, and then also to add due dates and any other notes related to this project. This is useful if I have a project which I haven't touched base with in a while and I need to pick up where I left off. This sort of allows me to just pick up quickly using the project notes and the project description and overview, and also the outstanding tasks in essence. So what does this mean in the context of planning? It basically means that my planning takes place in the context of creating projects. So I don't necessarily actively sit down and think about what I'm going to do for the next month. I have various projects which are running concurrently, and based on the due dates of those projects, I have to make a judgment about what is important, what can be moved out a little bit further, bearing in mind that due dates are coming up, and how do I chunk those projects so that I don't, or rather chunk the tasks that are related to the projects so that I don't, for instance, need to do all-nighters where I have so many tasks related to a particular project that I don't have enough time to do it. And that's basically what the tasks help me do within the project. So when I decide what I'm going to do for the coming week, this is also where my Google Calendar becomes important. But I can go to my 7-day overview. So on a Sunday when I'm sitting down and I'm doing my planning, I take my Google Calendar and I go to my 7-day overview and I look at what do I have time for and what I need to change a due date on. So just going to the 7-day overview, which sits in my task manager, I have a list of tasks that need to be completed within the next 7 days. So the filter within this view is that the date includes everything that has a due date up to a week from now. So when I sit down on a Sunday, I look at what's on this list, and then I can squeeze them into my Google Calendar and see where I have time. And having time is important because there are meetings which are not captured here, although those meetings would be in my Google Calendar. So for instance, if I have an all-day workshop on Wednesday, for instance, then Wednesday is not an available day for any tasks, depending on what type of task it is, for example. So if I have something that has a due date for Wednesday, I need to move it to either Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday. Or if it's not very urgent and there are more urgent things to do within this week, then I'll move that to next week or perhaps 2 weeks from now, depending on the due date of the bigger project it forms a part of. Another important thing to note here is that there are tasks which don't form part of bigger projects, like I said, and secondly, there are recurring tasks. So for instance, my weekly calendar, I have it as part of an admin task, although admin is really an area, it can't really be a project, because it's very sort of unspecific and it's ongoing. It has no due date. But basically this weekly calendar is a recurring task, and it comes up every Sunday. So this is a task that doesn't necessarily belong to a bigger project, and it never gets done because I need to do it every single week. Without doing this weekly calendar time blocking, which I do in my calendar based on what's on the 7-day view, I basically wouldn't know what I'm going to do if I wake up on Monday morning. And what happens when my calendar is clear is then that gives people opportunities to say, oh, can you quickly do this thing for me? Are you available to meet on this day? So this sort of helps me to say no, in essence, to say no, I've already got these things planned out for the week. This doesn't mean that I'm inflexible. If there's an urgent meeting and it is slotted in at the same time as a task that can be moved to next week, perhaps the due date of the bigger project is not that urgent, that's something I can accommodate. But if I look at the number of tasks within the project and I realize that if I don't do this task now, I won't be able to get it done later, because later is reserved for the millions of other tasks within that project, then I'd need to say no, or I need to move it to a slot that is given to something that is less urgent. This weekly overview, I have a lot of stuff on this weekly overview because this week was not a very productive week for me. But based on what my calendar would look like for next week, I might be able to slot all of this in. Also important to remember is that not all tasks require a big chunk of time. So a lot of admin tasks I do in generic admin slots that I have on Monday and Friday within my Google Calendar. So those are just admin slots that I have. If I have admin tasks that can be completed within those slots, I actually just change the due date to either the Monday or the Friday of the coming week, depending on how urgent the task is. If it needs to happen on Monday, I do it on Monday. If it can wait until Friday, I do it on Friday. I also try to remain cognizant of how many tasks I slot into that period, because it usually is just about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So if it is an admin task that requires a larger chunk of time, I would perhaps give it its own slot within my Google Calendar. But if it's something like schedule a meeting or send an email or send a document, that's something that I just generically slot into a Monday or Friday of the week. What does this mean for monthly planning though? This essentially means that I don't necessarily look at the month ahead. having my projects set up in this way means that I'm sort of planning for the month by implication. But essentially what I'm committing to is what I'm doing within the next week, bearing in mind how many active projects I have going on at the same time, and breaking those down in such a way that I can make the deadline. So whether this deadline is this month or next year, the point is it needs to be broken down in such a way that I can manage that workload over a sustained period of time. And that's essentially how I do my planning. If you like this video, remember to like and subscribe so you can get a notification when I release a new video. Happy planning!